r/NoSleep. Posted by u/SignedSyledDelivered. How I survived by avoiding horror movie tropes. I counted down the seconds to midnight, restlessly rearranging the fruits on the table. As the numbers on the clock flicked to 0 o'clock, the footsteps started up again. They didn't start the way other footsteps I heard usually did, faint sounds from the end of the corridor, getting gradually louder as they neared my door, then fading away as whoever it was passed. These footsteps began, each night, directly outside my door, as if someone materialized there. That would go back and forth before my door, steady rhythmic steps that lasted for a couple of minutes. 2 minutes and 51 seconds, to be exact. The first time it happened, I had timidly looked out the peephole to check who it was. I remember the cold wobble that sprouted in the pit of my stomach when I saw an empty corridor outside. Yet the footsteps continued. Subsequently, I'd made it a point to ignore the footsteps. I'd watched enough horror shows to know that one should never go out to check when you hear suspicious sounds outside. In fact, I had decided right then, that I would avoid any horror movie tropes, and rely on acting completely opposite of what any victim in horror films would do. I started to try to sleep earlier to ignore the footsteps, but never could. I ended up lying in bed, closing my eyes tightly, yet still hearing the faint sounds of the steps outside. One night, I had music playing loudly, and at midnight, the music drowned out the steps outside. I figured I'd just apologize to my neighbors the next day. I smiled, nestling my head higher on the pillow. It was a great relief to not have to hear the sounds of the steps. I didn't realize how stressed I had been by them. A minute of bliss passed as I basked in the music. Then loud knocks tore through my peace. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. It was probably just the neighbors. I reassured myself. They were probably knocking to get me to turn down the music. I stopped the music, and waited. The knocks continued. I waited for someone to call my name or say anything, prayed that someone would. My neighbors and I were pretty close, so they definitely would say something if I didn't come to the door. There was no sound. The knocks were getting more insistent, louder. Perhaps the knocks would wake others up, and they'd come. The knocks stopped, but before I could breathe a sigh of relief, the sound of keys jangled outside. I heard a key inserted into the front door, and jiggling sounds. Then the loud click of the lock popping open. My heart lurched, and started hammering rapidly. No one else has my house key. I'd not hidden any spares outside either. As my fear intensified, time seemed to slow. Suddenly, a sharp clarity cut through everything, numbing my emotions and jolting my brain into action. I had no way out of the apartment other than the front door. My windows had grills on them. I had a wooden katana hanging on the wall right outside my bedroom door. I had knives in the kitchen, but those were too far. I wouldn't be able to make it there and back before whoever it was got in. I sprung out of bed, and burst out of my bedroom, heading straight for the wooden katana. I grabbed it off the wall, spotted the vase on the counter and grabbed it too. As I spun around to sprint back into my bedroom, the front door swung open. I heard someone enter, the footsteps thudding in, but there was no one there. I could feel my terror beginning to rise up and spill into the cold, clean sphere that had enveloped my mind in the past few seconds. I rushed into the bedroom and slammed the door shut, twisted the lock in place. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and dialed the police. That was another mistake in horror movies, people not calling the police for some silly reason or another. I didn't care if the police thought I was crazy, I just needed them to come. The operator answered. Someone broke into my apartment, I'm hiding in the bedroom but I'm not sure how long my door would hold. Please come now, please. I made sure not to mention anything that would make them doubt the validity of my call. The operator asked me to stay on the line and reassured me that the police were heading over. I put the call on speaker, and started looking for anything that could block the door. I didn't make a sound, and told the operator not to as well. I'd seen enough people scream on horror shows, highlighting their locations and triggering quick ends to their lives. I grabbed the wooden katana in one hand, and the vase in another. I frantically recalled all the ways victims died in horror flicks. No hiding in the cupboard, that's for sure. I didn't have a basement, or an attic, so that was settled. I wasn't going to ask if it was a prank, I wasn't going to charge towards it. I'd stand at the ready, lob the vase at whoever entered, see what happens. If it hit, I'd know that thing could be hit, and I'd jab the person in the throat and eyes with my wooden katana, then just keep hitting until I was sure the person was out. Or dead. Then keep hitting. I knew from horror shows that they almost never are truly down for the count. I wouldn't hover over the person to check for a pulse. I'd leap right over and head straight for the door, then run down the stairs. The footsteps neared my bedroom door. Then my door lever went down, but the lock held the door in place. The door juddered as whoever it was tried to open it. The footsteps retreated after a while. I noticed the full-length mirror hanging on the cupboard door behind me. I had to hope that the horror tropes about looking into mirrors did not come true here. But perhaps some other tropes about mirrors may be true. Still tensed, I quickly put down the vase and angled the cupboard door with one hand, such that the mirror was facing the door. I picked up the vase again, and stood behind the door, staring at the mirror, ready to strike once whoever it was came into view in the reflection. The footsteps were back. Keys. Again. I couldn't believe it. Even I didn't know where the bedroom keys were. How did this person have it? I put the vase down and held down the lock on the inside, so that the key would not turn. But the force outside was too strong. The lock turned despite my desperate grasp. Despite my prayers, the key did not break, and the lock clicked open. I grabbed the vase and slid behind the door as it swung open. I stared at the mirror. There was no one there. Then, a pair of eyes appeared in the mirror, eyes which stared directly at their reflection. They widened, and then the rest of the figure materialized in the mirror. It was a young man, who seemed startled by his reflection. He didn't seem like a typical horror villain. He seemed normal. But that was a regular trope too. The seemingly innocent guy, the one who seems most normal, turns out to be the murderer. At that thought, I threw the vase straight at his head. The ceramic shattered about his face, opening a deep gash in his forehead. He reached up to his head, seemingly stunned. I jabbed the katana forward at his eyes. He howled and grabbed his eyes. Then I jabbed it at his throat, and he choked, grabbed at his throat, and fell to the floor. I slammed the wooden katana down on his groin. He let out a choked gasp and curled up. Never stop even when they're down. I knew that from horror movies. I swung the katana wildly, each hit smacking into his head with a loud, sickening thunk. He stopped moving. I hit his head a few more times, just to be safe. Then I leapt over his inert body, and ran to the door. In the corridor, I ran straight into two police officers. I grabbed at them, relieved, and started rambling on about what had happened. They calmed me down, and walked towards my apartment, cautioning me to stay outside. They walked in, and I waited in the corridor, shaking. My nerves were catching up with me. I only just noticed the tears dribbling down my cheeks. The police officers came out. "There's no one in your apartment. Are you sure you knocked him out? Is there a back way out?" I stared blankly for a moment, then pushed past them into the apartment. He wasn't there. The police officers asked me a lot of questions. One of them looked impatient and upset. He seemed to think I had made the whole thing up, though he refrained from saying so outright. The lady officer seemed lost in thought. She frowned a lot, and looked ill at ease at some points. I repeated what had happened multiple times, and the other officer went off to make a call. It was then that the lady officer spoke up, hesitantly. Well. She paused for a while. "A couple years back, I was here too, at this apartment. I think it was 4-5 years ago?" She drew a deep breath. "There was a young man, who was dead in his apartment. This apartment. His head had been badly beaten, and he died from his injuries." I listened, not comprehending in that moment. The attacker was never found. There was nothing, no evidence, according to the detectives who worked the case. It was as if the attacker had been in his bedroom without breaking in, or leaving a trace, then disappeared after attacking him. I realized what she was trying to tell me. A dark, heavy dread arose in my chest, and slowly spread to the pit of my stomach. I was still in denial, logically. It made no sense. The other officer came in then, and she changed the topic. They left soon after. I quickly packed my stuff and left to stay with a friend for the night. After apologizing for the late-night intrusion, I got comfortable on the couch, and took out my phone. I typed in my apartment name in the search engine, coupled with murder, death young man. The search results appeared. I hovered my finger over the images tab for what felt like a long time. Then I switched my screen off. I didn't have to know. Victims in horror movies often started their downward spiral with their need to know.